Okay, so yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Olivia. I'm joined with Howard, and today we're going to give you a bit of an overview about becoming an LGV instructor. So, just to give you a bit of background, we were due to be joined today by an LGV trainer, and unfortunately, due to circumstances beyond their control, they couldn't make it. So we thought we'd press on and just give you a bit of an overview in terms of what it might involve, and how you might think about going into this kind of field if you were thinking about doing that. So that's what we're going to talk to you about today. We'll do our best to answer your questions, but obviously anything we can't answer, then what we'd ask you to do is to put those questions, or all questions throughout the webinar anyway, put them in the Q&A box rather than the chat. That would be great, because then what we can do afterwards is download your questions, any that we need to come back to, then we know who's asked what, and we can do that. That would be brilliant. Thank you so much. So Q&A and Q&A, if you want to do some general chit chat, go in the chat box. That's great. What we'll also do, we understand as well that there are lots of industry questions that you've got. So what we would invite you to do is to, again, email DIA with those. We're not going to cover those on this session today. So if you could send them to help@driving.org or support@driving.org. Send any questions that you've got in there, then we can come back to you on there. Thank you very much.
Support@driving.org would actually be quicker if you did that rather than help, to be honest.
Yeah, support comes to Howard and myself. But help@driving.org will equally get to us. But yeah, as you say, it might be a little bit swifter on the response on them. But we are getting lots of inquiries, as you can imagine. So we'll aim to come back to you as soon as we possibly can. Right, so I think it's over to you now, Howard.
Okay, well, once again, good morning, everybody. And I hope you're all well and got over the shock of what's happening with the industry right now. The aim of this webinar today is to talk about and discuss the procedures of becoming an LGV trainer. We sometimes need to diversify in our businesses. This is a bit more difficult to diversify into, but what I'll be talking about is the reasonable practicalities of being able to do it. And it's not going to be a 5-minute job. It's not sort of just go and take a little bit of CPD and do it. It does need a bit of investment in time and a bit of planning of your time as well, because it's a bit more of a long drawn out process to do this, but it is possible to do. And for those of you who sort of have plans at sort of 3 and 5 years, it's well worth you looking at this for your business to grow into possibly. So if we can move on to the next slide. And what we have is to, first of all, define what an LGV is. Large goods vehicle, that's what it's known as, also known as heavy goods vehicle. But there's been a bit of a mix up with this because the Europeans used to use HGV all the time. HGV is something that the Europeans are trying to get rid of. LGV is far more beneficial. Everyone understands what large is as opposed to heavy. So there also is another mnemonic called LCV, which is light commercial vehicle. That sector is from 2 tons to 3.5 tons. LGV, large goods vehicles, starts at 3,500 kilograms. So it's anything heavier than what you can drive on your car license. Your category B license allows you to go to 3.5 tons. And then you go into category C1, which is a subcategory. But anything over 3,501 kilograms is classed as LGV, and it does need, it also needs other qualifications in order to do so. So rigid vehicles, 32 tons. Rigid vehicles go up to 32 tons, that's category C. Articulated vehicles, now articulated vehicles are the ones that have the trailer that hooks between the front and rear wheels of a tractor unit. So they sort of sit in the bed of the tractor unit, and a big trailer behind it is normally known as articulated. Drawbar vehicles are normally vehicles that are an A-frame. They can be dragged by an A-frame by a rigid vehicle, or they can be on an actual bar, known as wag and drag. and that can also be a 44-ton combination weight. So 44 tons is the maximum we're allowed to have on the roads at the moment. You probably remember over the years that many bridges were thinned and had to be strengthened because the previous weight was, I think, was 38 or 40 tons, and we had to come into line with Europe, and all our bridges had to be strengthened. And you'll probably realise that some of the trailers that are being towed now, articulated, have been extended by 1.05 meters, which means they've got the wheels on the back, but then there's a sort of fairly large gap between the very last trailer wheel, just to spread the weight across the road tarmac. So these vehicles, LGV, large goods vehicle, which is anything over 3,501 kilos. B plus E is also heavier than 3,501 kilos as well. It's another thing you can do with your license, but today we're going to talk about the LGV. So if we move on to the next slide, and we're going to talk about really truly what you want to do, because there's different avenues depending on what license you have. If you want to go for license acquisition, then you have to go to take the full tests and the initial CPC. That is where you'd go away to a training school and go for a theory test for LGV. The LGV theory test is the same test for rigids as it is for articulated. It's just one category C test, which includes hooking up as well. So you don't go and do a separate theory test for C plus E. It's all one theory test. So it's theory test and practical driving test. And then if you're going for license acquisition, you would go through a situation called initial CPC. You'd need to do that to get the license in the first place. Have to go through the application process, which we come to in a minute. The other way of going through this is if you have a grandfather, what they call implied rights, category C1 implied rights on your license, then you can go for familiarization and development. You don't have to have a full proper entitlement to category C1 if you took your test before the 31st December 1996. You can't do license acquisition on C1 on grandfather rights, that's not allowed. But for vehicle familiarization and development for people who are already a full license holder, that is allowed, and you don't need CPC for that. So we move on to the next slide. So how do you start? If you have LGV entitlement, then in order to be a trainer, you've got to be over 21 and have held a license for at least 3 years. If you have the C1 implied grandfather rights, again, you've got to be over 21 to train, but you can train in development, but not license acquisition for vehicles up to 7.5 tons. You can't do, generally, you can't do over that, and unless you're in the armed services. So we go on to the next slide. If you don't have the LGV entitlement, then you have to apply for a provisional license application, which is done on a form D2, and that's a form that's accompanied by a D4 form, which is the medical form. Now, I quite often get into conversations with other people that are going through the process. When I went through my process to do this about 6 years ago, I had to go to optometrist as well as a doctor, because on my forms, I was asked to do a night driving eyesight test, which only an optometrist can do. You cannot do that at the doctor's surgery. And there is actually a box on the D4 which says, have you been to the optometrist or to the, what do you call them? Well, you have your eyes tested. Have you been one of, say again?
Optician.
Opticians, that's the one. Have you been to the opticians to get the required eyesight test for this form? When I sent my form off, it was sent back to me by the DVLA because I hadn't ticked the box to say that I had had the specific eyesight test. I'd had one done by the doctor where they measured out the square board with all the letters on it. And he said, no, you shouldn't need an eyesight. No one's asked me to do this before for an LGV provisional license. But the DVLA sent it back to me and said, no, you can have this done. So I had to go to the optometrist and actually have a night vision test done on a machine. And they had to tick the box and sign it as well. You'd complete initial CPC if you're going to get your license. because you have to have the license and have held it for 3 years. Therefore, you've got to go through the CPC route as well in order to hold the license for 3 years and use that license to get your experience and your qualification. I say get your experience and your confidence and competence in order to pass on your experience. The way to do the training is through training organizations. There are quite a few of them around. So if we can move on to the next slide, we can talk about approved training bodies. And you'll find that you've got, that there is no formal qualification to be an LGV trainer, which is quite surprising. Unlike us at category B, we have to go through a part 1, part 2, and a part 3, or standards check as we call it now. With the lorry industry, the LGV industry, you don't have to go through that. If you have got a ADI qualification, whether it be for bikes or for cars, that stands you in good stead because you are more attuned to coaching and client-centered learning and finding out someone's particular learning style, etc., which guys that normally just they go training with their experience don't tend to have the training qualification, as it were. So it's best to do it through approved training bodies. The Road Transport Industry Training Board, or the RTITB as it's known, is DVSA accredited, and it's known as the National Register for LGV Instructors, although there is another one, which is the National Vocational Driving Instructor Registers. And a lot of the people that I've looked up, training bodies, tend to be on both of them. They don't have to be on either of them. So what I'd suggest is that if you want to go and become an LGV driver, first of all, before you convert to being a trainer, then you ought to go to one of these accredited, somebody who's on one of these registers, really, because at least with the National Vocational Instructors Register, it's a bit easier to get onto that than it is to get onto the RTITB, but they do have to jump through some hoops to be monitored, and there is some sort of monitoring that takes place, as opposed to a trainer having nothing at all. So if we move on to the next slide. Once you've got your qualification with the license acquisition and you've done the initial CPC as a driver initially, you also have to get a driver qualification card. This is in addition to the driving license, and this card allows you to work for hire and reward. Now you can use category C1, not for hire and reward, and still drive for yourself and do house movals. And in some circumstances, depending on operating licenses, you are able to use that to drive for charities, providing you're not paid. That's changed now because it used to be for an organization that makes no profit. It's now been changed to the driver must not be paid. And that's one of the changes that came out in August. So, but it lasts 5 years as a qualification card and coincides with the certificate of professional competence, which has to be done 35 hours over 5 years. So once you qualify with your category C license, you've successfully achieved the theory test and the practical test, and you've done your initial CPC, then you have to maintain your CPC with a minimum of 7 hours of continuing professional development, which is they call is a certificate of professional competence. And these courses can only be done by associations that are registered to the Joint Approvals Unit for periodic training. Otherwise, if you go and do any course for you think is CPC, only the stuff that's registered with JALP, Joint Approvals Unit, can be registered with the DVSA. So your CPC has to be registered continually, and you must keep your over 5 years, 35 years up together. You are not, you can work ahead on your hours. So you could do 14 hours in 1 year and do nothing the following year, but then you must do 7 hours in year 3 and keep up with it. What you can't do is to allow yourself to get behind with the CPC, because otherwise your qualification card is null and void, which does not allow you to drive for hire and reward. And this card must be carried at all times. So even if you are not driving a lorry and you have that card, then you are supposed to carry that card with you at all times when you're driving. So you go on to the next slide. And if you're going to be a trainer, you will be trained as a driver. When you learn to train to be a driver, you will have to learn about the driver's hours and the working time directives. These are two separate things. Driver's hours is an EU regulation, stipulates how many hours you can drive a day, how many days of the week, what rest breaks you have to take, what weekly rests you have to take, how many hours you can drive in a fortnight. It's all sorts of legislation there. It's different when it's double manned. It changes again. When you've got ferries involved, there's different breaks you have to take. So it's quite involved, and that is usually something you would want to do in your CPC over the 5 years, at least do 7 hours in that, because that changes quite often. We had a couple of changes to do with ferry crossings, which took place in August, to do with the interrupted breaks or interruption of rest that can take place when moving vehicles on and off ferries. That came into force in August, and there's more to come as well in April next year. In January the 1st, there's going to be a complete overhaul of legislation for anybody driving in Europe. That hasn't completely been put on the gov.uk website yet, but they're working on getting that out in time for trainers and training bodies to be able to be aware of what all that's about in terms of green cards and additional paperwork that has to be taken. Now, we're not in the European Union, but we've been given till 31st December to get all that in order to come into force on the 1st of January 2021. So anybody who's in a driver training organisation will need to look out for that, because some at least needs to be communicated with all the drivers to tell them what additional paperwork they're going to need to take. All the TIR information and legislation, I believe, is changing as well. So there's a lot of stuff to change there. The working time directives stipulates the maximum amount of time a driver can work before a break, and that includes driving. So that's normally they have to have a break within the first 6 hours of working, if they're working up to 9 hours, and the maximum average weekly hours they can work is based over a 17-week period, and that's a maximum of 60 hours a week they can do over 17 weeks. They're not allowed to work any more than that on the working time directive. So it's averaged over 17 weeks. There are some little formulas that are used within that for people that go sick and holiday, etc., as to how those 17 weeks are calculated. So you've got to be quite careful that you don't go over that as well at the same time. So it does get quite long and drawn. It is quite involved in the things that have to be known. But of course, there's with CPC, there's all the security of vehicles. There's sheeting, roping, strapping, all that sort of thing. Vehicle maintenance. There's several modules that the Joint Approvals Unit actually have modules, and there's a whole choice from you can take, but you must do 35 hours of CPC in any 5-year period. And what you can do is you can do 7 hours in one day, or you can do 3.5 hours in an afternoon, providing you do 3.5 hours the following morning. So in a 24-hour period, you have covered 7 hours, and the DVSA will accept that as well. So you haven't got to do full 7 hours or in one day. It can be spread over 2 days, providing it's afternoon and following morning. So we go on to the next slide, please. And we come to any questions you want to throw at us, really, in terms of this, because this is really an overview of what's to happen. But before we get any questions for anybody you want to send to us, the timescale, as you can see, for becoming a trainer at this, you have to hold the license for 3 years. And with being a trainer, you are really, to be professional, need to be a member of an organisation such as the RTITB or the Vocational Register, and get the backup from them, be aware of all of the changes to the legislation that are taking place for drivers' hours, etc., and get the experience. There's no point trying to be a trainer and assume that you can sit next to someone and tell them how to drive a wagon. If you haven't got experience of splitter boxes and drive on air brakes, you're no good to anybody. If you're going to be a trainer, you have got to drive these vehicles around and get your experience in those 3 years that you need to build up your qualification time to be a trainer. So this is the reason why they stipulate the 3 years, 21 years of age and 3 years, is to make sure that the people who get the license will have actually got plenty of time to get confidence and competence to be able to pass the skills on to others. So we do believe that there will eventually be a joint register for the bus and coach industry and the lorry driver industry. It's being bandied around as being called the joint register. The ADIs for category B and category A will probably eventually be joined to that, and B plus E will have to join it as well. So people doing B plus E training will eventually have to go onto a register. The reason they don't is it was missed in the European Third Directive in 2013. That is in the process of being appraised now. So any new legislation which we will have to tie up with Europe with, although we're not in Europe, we still have to align some of our stuff with them for a little while. It's likely that the B plus E, which at the moment is outside all the scope, will no longer be outside the scope. While we're talking about B plus E and LGV, there is the situation of learning about operators' licenses as well. It's all very well having licenses for driving the vehicles, but to actually operate the vehicles, there are 3 types of operating licenses. That includes B plus E as well, which a lot of guys, unfortunately, are not totally aware of. And I've spoken to casualty reduction officers and the police, and the amount of times they've pulled up a driver pulling trailers who are not even aware that they're supposed to have some sort of operating license for the goods they are carrying in the trailer, because the vehicle and the combination is over 3.5 tons. The guy said, if I've had £1 for everyone I've pulled up, he said, I'll be a very rich man, because there's a lot of ignorance to what an operating license is. So if you are going to be a trainer, you would need to sort of brush up on operating licenses, because if you train people that wish to start up as sole traders moving vehicles around over 3.5 tons, then they would probably need to be briefed on operating license, or at least be shown the way of where to find the information on that information. So there's quite a lot of scope in LGV. So first of all, if you have implied rights for category C1, you can do development driver training and induction training on category C1 if the driver is already fully licensed on a category above category C1 or above. You cannot do license acquisition on grandfather rights. That has never ever been the case since the 2013 Third Directive. So you have to be a full category C or above holder to be a trainer for anything above 3.5 tons, and have held that license for 3 years. So so license acquisition cannot be done on grandfather rights. You would have to have the full category C or CE remit in order to do license acquisition on anything over 3.5 tons. So that's the overview. There may be a few questions which we have here, which I can quickly answer. If you have a C plus E license before the CPC came into, do you have to do a CPC? That I'm going to have to come back with you, because I believe you do. There is no there is no retrospective stuff on this. If you're going to use the C plus E license, then you will have to do CPC, irrespective of whether you got that C plus E before CPC came in. A note of caution to anybody who is operating, the tachographs for vehicles that are analog tachographs, I believe March 2022, all vehicles will have to be retrospectively fitted with a digital device, and the analogs will have to be turned off. So wax charts will only be allowed to be used for manual entries and will not be allowed to be used on a scribe as from, I believe it's March 2022. I think it has to be, and I think they're called ST2s. That's some directive called an ST2 is a situation with that. So anybody who's using vehicles that have analog charts still at the moment will have to take note of that. And it is retrospective, and it's I know we're out of Europe, but you will not be allowed to drive that vehicle in Europe without the prescribed tachograph device in it. You'll get stopped at the border and turned around and sent back. Can you do CPC online at the moment? Yes, you can, but only certain organisations have got the derogation from JALPS to be able to do that. I know that Per Temps Driver Training is one of the organisations that is doing it, because they are doing that with Royal Mail. Royal Mail is the biggest fleet operator in the country with 48,000 vehicles, and they are doing online CPC at the moment. Mention CPC, initial CPC. You don't require, you're quite right, Ian, you don't require as a trainer, but if you are if you want to become a trainer for category C, then of course you've got to get license acquisition first, which means you've got to do the CPC initial stuff and keep up with it for the 3 years. So therefore the CPC won't be unknown to you, but you're absolutely right, you don't need it as a trainer. Okay. One thing I haven't mentioned is the digital tachograph card. Once you have qualified with passed all the tests, there's the theory and the practical driving test, you will be able to apply for a digital tachograph card. This has to be looked after, and I mean almost put under your pillow, because if you lose it, you really do cause yourself a lot of problems. It is the device that measures all the driving that you do, and the police take a very, very, very dim view if you are driving in a vehicle with a digital tachograph and you don't have the card in there and you are using the rolls to do manual entries. They will absolutely crucify you if you are driving without a card, unless the card is damaged and is being sent back, and there is some sort of email or some proof that the card is with the DVSA and being replaced. You shouldn't, ideally, any organisation will say to a driver, right, without the card, we'll make you double man, or we're not double man, we'll make you a driver's mate and put you in the cab, because it's so much grief for an organisation if they are found that a driver is driving without a tachograph, because it goes against their operator's licence, and no organisation can afford to have any encumbrances on the operator's licence, because it could mean that if there are too many encumbrances on the operator's licence, then the traffic commissioner, and there's 5 traffic commissioners around the country. Our local one for where we are at Gatwick, I believe, is Brighton. It's Rachel. And if she walks in, she can walk into any organisation that has operating licenses. She does not need to have any appointment to do so. And if she turns up or knock on the door, she is not there to have tea and cakes. I can tell you that now. She is there to inspect all of the things that are in terms of records of driving hours, vehicle checks, etc. And if there are too many encumbrances that she finds, she can make an organisation get every single vehicle checked every 56 days, even if they haven't turned a wheel. And that's what they call a period maintenance check, a PMC. She can demote an organisation that has been able to get some trust with the traffic commissioner, where they can have their vehicles tested later. She can degrade them back down to a 56-day check on every single thing if she finds too many things are wrong with the organisation. And you really, really don't want to be in a situation like that. No organisation wants to have those extra costs and have that noose around their neck. I've got something here from Kate. You don't think it's time that LGV had a training badge like ADIs, also SCs like ADIs, and make them equal in the industry? It's yes, and what's more, the industry, believe it or not, was very much greasy spoon, egg and chips, and no, don't bother me, mate, I'm driving my cab. They are changing tune since CPC has come in, and the operating license holders have found that there is definitely a decrease in major incidents involving LGVs. it has turned the heads of HR, human resources, human remains are affectionately known sometimes, but human resources, and also the people of operating licenses and chief executives have found that since CPC has been brought in, that they have been able to do a top-down regime to encourage guys to do it. And when I was my last CPC training course I did over at Barking, I had a group of people there. I walked in there, it was feet on the table, and it was, okay, mate, start. We're going to go to sleep. And when you're finished, let us know, type thing. But I managed to keep them engaged all the time. And at the end of it, they were most apologetic for treating me so badly when I first walked in the door, because they thought there was nothing to learn. And I had one of the bosses in there, which I didn't know was in there. And he said, look, this is really worthwhile. And the blokes were patting me on the back when they left and everything else, and saying, look, you know, we didn't realize that we could learn so much from this, because these guys were actually going to start getting problems with their tachographs on the Monday, because they didn't realize that the training was other work. And if they'd gone and not accounted this as other work and duty time, they weren't going to have enough weekly rest, and they were not aware of it. So I saved that organization 12 infringements on tachographs in 1 week. So they are starting to sit up now and realize that this professional stuff is actually keeping vehicles more maintained on the road. The police and VOs are actually saying the same things, that they're finding far less problems with HGVs and buses now than they used to since CPC came in. And we've now got the RTITB, who have actually started to think they are actually very good. They have actually got a 4-module course to get on their register, because they believe that there should be a parity with all of the ADI badges, whether it's motorbikes or cars or anything else. And the bus industry has an internal one as well. Most of it's done by internal examiners, but they have a register too, which people have to go on to. So it's only a matter of time before LGV comes on board, and there'll be an integrated register of all driver trainers fairly soon. The DVSA are trying to work towards this now. Audit and fleet will also go on it as well, possibly. So there will be one integrated register which will do everything. So LGV will be brought into line, Kate, fairly soon. I say fairly soon, you're probably looking at 5 years, but it should be done within the next 5 years, I reckon. So that's me pretty much finished. If anyone else has got any more questions they want to send in to us, because I do appreciate, I've had to race through this because it is only an overview and we don't have a lot of time to do this anyway. Anybody has any more questions, I've got a few here. We'll download these and I will answer them. So Daniel, I will answer you. Dave, I will answer you as well when I get round to it. I will send you, get back to you with these. So we will leave that there for now, if you will. It's just a taster for people to be able to plan with a business plan. If they feel they want to get involved with the sector of LGV, what they're going to have to do, how many years it might take them, they can plan their funds to do it as well. If you go onto the RTITB website, there's a very useful tool there which can tell you how much it's likely to cost you to do all of your training with the average trainer, and the CPC that you need to get you going to do your 3 years. Very useful that if the ADI industry does go very sour like it is at the moment with the lockdown, that you could actually turn your hand to driving the lorries, because food and parcels have to be delivered. I mean, I understand that Parcel Force, the figures that Steve, who was going to be here today, gave me last week, Parcel Force have had a 90% increase in business in the last 7 months. That's from March, where people have been buying stuff online, ordering the wrong stuff or the wrong size and sending it back in returns. So there's been a heck of a lot of, a real big increase in demand for drivers. And soon as lockdown was released, I've been over at Parcel Force Ipswich, and I have hardly stopped. And I work here for the DIA for 3 days a week, but at least one full day a week, I've been over at Parcel Force Ipswich doing training of lorry drivers over there for, large van drivers over there, doing Mercedes Sprinters over there, doing it for them, sorting out their van drivers, because they just, the stuff's exponentially gone up through the roof. So there is scope for you to earn money if you've got the licenses to help you keep your businesses going, so you can do your ADI alongside the LGV. And if you go and get your category C, there's nothing stopping you from driving smaller vehicles and then building yourself back up again until you get the full confidence that you need to be able to think about training and joining registers, or RTITB or the vocational register, and working with a driver training school, even getting on the JELPT register and getting yourself qualified to deliver the CPC courses. It's all revenue that's there for you to take if you are willing to invest in the time and just give it some thought, because it's well worth thinking about doing. I've got to say, in the 15, 16 years I was in the transport industry, I'm not in it now, I do training now, but I was in it, I thoroughly enjoyed it, I really did. It's only for the fact that I was injured in the fire brigade that I had to stop doing it, because my back got so badly damaged. I had to stop being in transport as well, but I do miss those days, I really do. It's not as bad. It's not such a dirty job as everyone makes out it is. It's what you make it, but it really is quite a rewarding job to, when you see someone's face light up when they've been waiting for something for some time and you've got it on the back of your wagon, is quite endearing sometimes. So there is a benefit of brightening somebody's day doing it as well, and earning money at the same time. And it is becoming more professional than it was, a lot more professional. So I'm going to leave that there now, if that's okay. And we're going to move on. It's just gone 11:30. If that's, I'll hand it back to you now, Olivia, for anything else that's on these screens.
Okay, thank you, Howard. Really interesting listening with lots of interest there, lots of information. As you say, it is an overview, and we are hoping to get an LGV trainer in rescheduled for the new year. So any further information will be on there. And as Howard said, yes, we'll download your questions, any ones that Howard couldn't get to answer, and then we'll come back to you soon as on those. Yeah, just to the usual, whoopsie daisy, the usual tailing off of these webinars. Just so you know, we've got a B+E. Howard touched on that today a little bit, but we've got a B+E guest speaker on the 20th of November coming in to talk about that. On the 27th of November, we've got the Information Commissioner's Office, so we got a guest speaker from there. People are always, there's a subject of data protection, and am I doing everything I can be or can do? Am I complying? Am I any loopholes and I'm not seeing? What is the ICO? What do they do? How do I join? What are the benefits? All of that, we'll look to cover that on that session. So that will be a really interesting one as well. And we've got more lined up for you in December as well. So that's the webinars. In terms of our short online courses in our DI Academy, so Equality and Diversity Study Session, we did a first one of those yesterday. So on our DI Academy website, diacademy.co.uk, there are lots of courses on there, short courses, different subjects, and one of them is equality and diversity, very important subject, something which, a lot of us have got a fair decent amount of knowledge on, but sometimes it's good just to clarify the definitions of things and also think about how it can impact on us as trainers in our industry. So whether it's the harassment or discrimination or whatever it might be, may be pointed towards us, or maybe it's something that we're doing and not knowing, or saying something and not knowing, and we have had cases of those in the industry. That is a good one. It's quite a short course on Academy, and so you'll be going off doing a bit of self-learning with that, but then we have some dates booked in where you can just do a little Zoom with me, and we can throw some ideas around. I'll ask you some questions, get you to think about a few things. So that's that. So hopefully you can get involved with that. Online safeguarding starts week after next. Again, that will be a course where you go away. It's normally the one-day classroom one that we do. Those two courses there, kind of, there is an obvious link between the two. So if you're going to do one, think about doing the other one as well. So that will be a safeguarding is an accredited course, and again, it's lots of information so you can help protect other people. It is the course is course that you can apply to any situation in life. However, the study sessions that I'll host during that will be industry specific. So we'll look at things that we can issues that we'd have in our industry. And then we are also launching our Academy, DI Academy virtual classroom short courses. So Howard and I will be hosting the first one of those in December. And we're about to send, I think, an email later today on that. So look out for those. Standards checks are up and running. Well, they not currently, but they will be again. And so obviously we know lots of people have standards checks coming up or do them. So that's something which you might want to have a little look at as well. Any questions on any of those, send us an email to support@driving.org, as well as any other DI member questions, and then we'll come back to you on there. I think that's almost it for today. Yeah, just the usual little bits at the end there about how we can help support you as members as part of your membership on there. So hopefully everyone has enjoyed that session today. We do thank you for your time. Thank you for attending. This has been recorded and so will be available on our Academy website within the next week or so. And thank you for your time and your knowledge, Howard. That was great. And I'll bid you all goodbye.